Good evening. Welcome to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver. I'm an employment law and business law attorney, and I host this live weekly talk radio show and this live weekly video broadcast every Tuesday night from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on Talk Radio NYC, where I have guests who discuss some of the most novel, complex, and timely topics that business owners and employers are facing today. And in that spirit, I'd like to welcome tonight very special guest, very talented Renaissance man, Mr. Andy Botwin. Andy is the founder of Strategy People Culture. Andy, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Happy to be here, Eric.
Great. Happy to have you. I'm sure we'll have an interesting, great dynamic conversation for our guest audience tonight. And
I hope I can live up to being a true Renaissance man, though. I'm not sure how I qualify, but we'll figure that out.
We'll figure that out as we go along. And I have no doubt you'll live up to that name, that description. I don't use it lightly. So, well, in that sense, why don't I just tell our guests and rather audience what our topic is this evening, and then I'll read your bio, and I'll let the guests decide that Renaissance man issue. So our topic tonight is executive leadership, workplace culture, and countering the Great Resignation. And, basically, Andy and I will talk about the fact that too often the conversation around mass resignations and employee burnout focuses solely on the employee, on uncovering the root of their dissatisfaction and seeking to boost their morale. And while this is a valuable and necessary point of focus, we're saying that there's another key component to countering the Great Resignation and to reducing employee turnover, and that's improving the leadership style and the management methods of executives and high-level supervisors. This evening, you'll join me and my guest, Andrew Botwin, Esquire, SPHR, SHRM, SCP, PCC, and MBA, founder of Strategy People Culture, LLC, and we'll discuss the connection between building strong executive leaders within a company and listening to responding to employee issues regarding workplace burnout, implicit bias, and the challenges that are feeding the Great Resignation. And Andy, before I get to any questions, I want to just read a bit of an introduction, a bio about you, if I may, to sort of tell our guests more about you and why you're here this evening. And let me just do that right now. I'll just mention, as I said, our guest tonight, Andy Botwin, founder of Strategy People Culture, which is a firm dedicated to helping businesses to understand and develop intentional workplace cultures, the development of executive leaders, and conducting independent workplace investigations on employment matters. Andy has over 25 years of experience working with individuals and teams, including owners, CEOs, directors, managers, and high potential employees. He is a retired attorney, has advanced education in human resources, and holds several commensurate licenses and certifications. Andy Botwin has extensive experience in public accounting, both as an auditor and chief human resources officer. He brings his unique blend of services, including executive coaching, workplace culture consulting, training, and independent workplace investigations and EEO matters together in his practice. Andy has successfully worked with many levels of leaders, from small entrepreneurial businesses to Fortune 100 companies. And as part of his practice, Andy conducts training on anti-harassment and anti-discrimination with sensitivity to compliance standards in all 50 US states, in addition to trainings around bias and general workplace behaviors. And further, Andy delivers high-end customized leadership training programs and organizational culture reviews to meet client-specific needs. He has spoken around the nation in various capacities, including as an investigations expert and trainer of anti-harassment policies, bias, and diversity and inclusion issues in the workplace. Andy is a certificate holder from the stringent testing standards of the Association of Workplace Investigators, and he is a philanthropic board member and trustee for a nonprofit organization helping disabled adults develop and work towards independent living. So in short, a Renaissance man. I rest my case.
Fair enough.
Yes, fair enough indeed. So, all right, Andy. Well, again, really glad to have you on this, topic, the Great Resignations, really gotten a lot of media attention, and it's in on people's minds and their hearts. But let me ask you a sort of starting question. I told our audience a lot about you, but you could tell us a little bit more about yourself in terms of like your history, like mainly like how did your career initially start out, and what prompted you, what inspired you to found your firm, Strategy People Culture?
Sure. So I guess to give you an idea of how my career started, and it's a good way to lead into what ultimately got me to the point to start my own company. I was an auditor out of college for one of the very large firms, Arthur Andersen, at the time. Some of the younger listeners may not even know who they are, as some history has not boded well for them, but they were a highly respected public accounting firm, and I really didn't like my experience. I spent about 2 years there. There were some great things about the organization, but I don't know if from a maturity standpoint, I was really ready for that kind of work and environment. So I had a strong relationship with somebody who ran a very large and successful recruiting company, essentially staffing and payrolling company, with offices all over the country. And he said, "Why don't you come work for me?" Everybody, I knew, my friends, people would always say, "Oh, you love talking to people. You love being around people. You should be in human resources." Not exactly understanding what human resources really meant, but it seemed to fit, it seemed to make sense. And I spent a little under 5 years there doing a variety of things, from recruiting, temporary recruiting, to national recruiting, to getting involved operationally with areas around risk management, insurances. That was in the 90s when PEOs were starting to really take a new form and explode. And I got involved in developing some of those as well. And truthfully, at a certain point, I started getting bored. It was time for me to leave. I was still fairly young. And, when I was looking at the clock every day and the days were going along, and you could stay till 6 o'clock and just be a superstar for staying late, I realized that wasn't what I wanted for the rest of my life. And I wound up back in public accounting, except as the human resources manager for a regional firm in the Northeast, but was that a firm that was really growing very fast. They had some niche services, and had really carved out a pretty good name for themselves. And as they were growing and really exploding, I mean, picture an organization whose revenue was organically growing, 40 to 50% a year. Their employee headcount was also growing, to keep pace with that, but the turnover was also in the 40% range. So, we became kind of a ramshod recruiting practice, trying to build an infrastructure around proper human resource management. And 12 years later, as I was getting ready to leave to start my company, Strategy People Culture, it's actually the first of 2 companies that I own. We were being named to Fortune Magazine's 100 Best Places to Work. And it was through those years of challenge, trying to get an organization to move, listen, a large partnership with a lot of people that were partners. Certainly not all partners created equal in terms of say, but essentially they were making more money every year. And so, I had to overcome the concept of, we're doing great. Why do we need to change what we're doing? And 40% turnover is just not sustainable. It's very costly. It affects the bottom line of a business. And so I really became inspired, and I decided to step out and create this entity with that funny name called Strategy People Culture.
Yeah, it's interesting. It's like, you certainly have very kind of widely diverse background between the accounting and the top level Fortune 100 firms. Arthur Andersen, I remember that name quite well from the 90s, and also remember hearing some not so great things about their future fate. So I know, again, younger listeners might want to Google that, but interesting that, I guess hearing that last thing you said, Andy, about how this place was saying to you, we're doing great, maybe just like looking perhaps at their own bottom line, but yet the turnover was not great. And maybe I guess that disconnect sounds like didn't sit well with you from a perspective of strategy, people, and culture, right? Employee relations and HR.
Yeah, it really gets to the heart of it, and I don't want to move forward towards leadership development, but your question,
Mhm.
to me touches on some of that.
Yeah,
You know, from a leadership standpoint, how do you know your business has reached its ceiling? How do
right.
you know you've reached your ceiling? And no one really knows. But what you do know is if you have a vision for your organization and you're growing, your success, and certainly one of the reasonable ways to measure success is how are we doing financially?
Mhm.
And if demand for services was growing, income related to the work that you were doing was growing. And
Yeah.
as a business grows, and if you're in a leadership role, your responsibilities tend to also grow with that.
Mm.
And so it's easy to sometimes see that and say, we are successful. And they were successful. And we were successful. However, we could have been more successful. And
Mm.
there's a real cost to turnover. There's many different ways to look at that and metrics to calculate across a wide scale, but there's still a cost to turnover.
Mm.
And if we could lower our turnover, keep people longer, we didn't have such a brain drain. We got continuity on clients, which improved client service, that improved our reputation, and helped foster greater careers. Even for when
Mm.
people ultimately left, they felt better about the organization and became alumnus of the organization and referred business and became clients.
That's an important piece, right? The employee retention is not just about getting the most out of your employees when they're there, but like if they do end up leaving on a good note, they can refer potential talent back to you and refer potential, like you mentioned, a good point, clients back to you, not just sort of leave it and be done with your organization. I think it's like an interesting point too, Andy. You bring up about just this word success and how it's defined and what it means. Is it just the numbers on a spreadsheet, just the bottom line? Like if you ask different people, from a perspective, let's say of a CFO or an accountant, but from a diversity and inclusion standpoint, or from an HR or even employment law attorney like myself, perspective, I dare say that the answer to that question of success or definition of success also has to do with, as you mentioned, turnover and employee satisfaction, amongst other points. So it's interesting to hear you talk about that, and then to sort of touch on leadership, which we'll definitely get to as well. You know,
Yeah, sorry if I jumped ahead, but you put
that's
it
okay.
out there. It just made sense.
No, totally. It's like we're a very organic type of show. We just like sort of flow with a general outline of questions, but we're pretty organic. In fact, I will, in the spirit of being organic, I will we have our commercial break coming up in a minute, but I think best to take it now than to pose a question and then take it before you can answer. So I'll just note that we're on our first commercial break, folks. You're listening to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauber. My guest tonight, Andy Botwin, founder of Strategy People Culture. Stay tuned for more. We'll talk about some of the record high employee dissatisfaction with the Great Resignation, and we'll talk about some of the ways to counter that. Talk Radio NYC. We'll be right back.
Are you a business owner? Do you want to be a business owner? Do you work with business owners? Hi, I'm Stephen Fry, your small and medium-sized business or SMB guy, and I'm the host of the new show, Always Friday. While I love to have fun on my show, we take those Friday feelings of freedom and clarity to discuss popular topics on the minds of SMBs today. Please join me and my various special guests on Friday at 11 a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a conscious co-creator? Are you on a quest to raise your vibration and your consciousness? I'm Sam Leibowitz, your conscious consultant. And on my show, The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, we will touch upon all these topics and more. Listen live at our new time on Thursdays at 12 noon Eastern Time. That's The Conscious Consultant Hour, Awakening Humanity, Thursdays, 12 noon on talkradio.nyc.
Are you on edge? Hey, we live in challenging, edgy times, so let's lean in. I'm Sandra Bargman, the host of The Edge of Every Day, which airs each Monday at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc. Tune in live with me and my friends and colleagues as we share stories and perspectives about pushing boundaries and exploring our rough edges. That's The Edge of Every Day on Mondays at 7 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC. Uplift, educate, empower.
Welcome back to Employment Law Today. Once again, I'm your host, Eric Sauber. I'm an employment law, business law attorney. I think I jumped the gun there. And we're still welcome back to Employment Law Today. I think I jumped the gun on my cue there. I'm your host, Eric Sauber, employment law, business law attorney. My guest tonight, Andy Botwin, founder of Strategy, People, and Culture. And a quick shout out to Dr. Lance Knob, watching out there and I think reposting in the 4% Breakthrough group on Facebook. Lance, pleasure to see you watching the audience tonight. We're talking about some ways to counter the Great Resignation through a two-pronged approach, right? Focusing on the employee experience and the employee's morale and eradicating implicit bias and other workplace issues. But we're also focusing, at least from Andy's perspective, on leadership development and turning around poor leadership and having executive coaching in that regard. So I guess my first question to Andy, to lay the foundation here, is what do you believe are some root causes of this record high employee dissatisfaction, AKA the Great Resignation?
Yeah, I think like many issues, there's lots of facets, and there are some of the sort of more common ones. What I hear most people talk about is COVID, the return to COVID, or from COVID, if that's what we're in, and the demand of the workforce to be able to work more fluidly, more remotely. And so I hear that as a common issue, and some employers are being more insistent on their people coming to work, which is certainly creating some of that dynamic. But I think there's a lot of issues and reasons that I don't hear a lot in everyday sort of chatter and conversation that bear merit. For starters, generationally, baby boomers. I think that's a group of people that coming out of COVID, a lot of them have decided to stay retired. Probably at a disproportionate rate from what we would have expected under sort of a normal attrition factor. So that's one component, and that's a lot of experience, a tremendous brain drain, leaving the working place. There's other issues like inflation, which, I'm not an economist, and, I understand very basic micro and macroeconomics. But, we might see inflationary numbers that the government produces. I don't know that always jives with what people are feeling, though. So think about it, a car. Used cars cost way more than they did 2 years ago. In fact, a used car that I bought 2 years ago, perhaps I can sell it for more than I paid for it 2 years ago, which is very untraditional. And new cars, certainly, supply and demand is a major issue. So I think what people are feeling is a higher level of inflation than at least what the statistics tend to say. And with that, then people are making different decisions about their work, where they're working, how they're working. And I also think that there's some what I might think about as one-sided thinking on the business side. There's confusion around business commitments with real estate. I have an office that I pay X dollars in rent for, and there's a lack of connecting that, and business decisions are sometimes being made without thinking about finding a middle ground between that commitment that's already in some ways a sunk commitment, because it may not be as easy to get sublease type of arrangements today, with the needs of employees. And usually there's a middle ground in that question. I don't know if it's asked well enough. I also think that there's some real and perceived problems that are out there that make it difficult for employers. For example, as successful as many companies have been, some have certainly struggled through the pandemic, but some companies have had record profits, by having people work remotely when in the past they couldn't have. An industry like professional services, where I have a lot of direct experience in, that had been a struggle for many years. Yet I know many firms, accounting firms, law firms alike, that have had their best years ever in terms of efficiency. Yet on the flip end, there's inefficiency with conversations, the ability to walk down the hall and ask somebody a quick question for 2 minutes. That's sometimes lost, and people can't get a hold of somebody because their calendars are full and they don't answer the phone, even with the different forms of technology and medium with instant messaging, Slack channels. Some people pay more attention to that than others, and those can become distracting, and then emails get lost. And so I think there's lost communication that happens, along with many other factors.
Interesting there. I've asked this question to several guests, from different backgrounds and different fields over the last, I guess, maybe 10 months or 8 months or so. So it's great to hear your perspective there, Andy. I hear some sort of external factors, meaning maybe outside the actual specific workplace. Like, that's good to note also. For example, the generational aspect of baby boomers who might be retiring at increased rates, for example, or inflation, right? It's an external economic condition factor that certainly does impact, I think, people's choices to stay in a job, but to maybe to try their own hand at their own company or firm, or leave for more money. And the commercial real estate issue as well. That isolation, that last piece, I think is interesting too, because I think a lot of companies, on one hand, you hear a lot of employers say, well, we're going to attract talent and retain them by offering this complete remote workforce, 100%, work from home. You can log in your pajamas in your living room, and no traffic, no commutes, no subway, no train, no all that stuff. But with that remote work, what I'm hearing you say, I think, if I'm hearing correctly, there's a sense of isolation when you can't collaborate or ask a question down the hall. And so maybe that can perhaps ironically improve some, or rather increase some of the employee burnout, increase some of the, the sort of dissatisfaction. Ironically, it might have been originally aimed to promote that, like, hey, this is a great benefit, but yet it can have a deleterious effect. So interesting.
Yeah, well, I think that's what makes it so complex, because we tend to look for an answer.
Right.
An explanation, and there isn't one. We're not a one size fits all, right? We all have different personalities, different likes. Some people like the ability to work from home in pajamas. Other people want to be in the office. The problem is, how do you figure out a way to make the masses, I'll use the word happy sort of in quotes, but appeal to what is going to be best for them in a way that they can give you their best, because that's the reality. You're hiring people for them to give you their best to help your organization be better. And who really likes a commute? Very few people. Some people might say, I like the drive time because it's a time for me to defrag my brain a little bit, grab a cup of coffee on the way and listen to the radio. And some of those might be nice, but most people would like to have limited commutes when they can. So it's just a very, very complex issue that I think leaders, sometimes people in leadership positions, maybe is the better way to say it, managers that have to make decisions, sometimes make a decision that's overly influenced by their pure opinion and thinking that they need to have a direct answer instead of just better communication.
Yeah, right. It's like, if you're looking just for one answer, one solution to one explanation to this, great resignation, to employee dissatisfaction, employee turnover, you're not going to find it, because there are many aspects of this, right? Many, I guess, factors that play into this, many issues. I'm wondering if you see issues such as, like, say, lack of, sufficient diversity at a company, or implicit bias. Like, is that another factor that you might have noticed in terms of the contributing factor, I should say, for the Great Resignation?
Yeah, I certainly, I mean, implicit bias, I actually teach a course on that in my business,
Right.
more around awareness of what unconscious bias really is. I kind of stop there. I don't get too heavily involved in pure DEI work,
Sure.
as I focus more on the sexual harassment and discrimination space.
Mhm.
But, you know, when we think about diversity, equity, inclusion, the last few years, well, that has been an issue for a long, long time. The last couple of years, it seems like it's become a little bit of this esprit de corps. And, you know, if we talk about this almost straight line thinking that we started to touch on a little bit before,
Right.
I think it's the same kind of concept there. You know, a lot of companies that are trying to do something about it, they're really trying to go deep and do something material with it. On the flip end, there's a lot of companies that are trying to do something to say that they're doing something,
Right.
and they're throwing sort of a marginal or not sufficient enough effort to really make a meaningful dent. And you know, I kind of, as I'm saying that, I'm having this visual of an old movie. I can't even remember the name. The asteroid was coming to Earth. Bruce Willis and Ben Affleck. If you know the movie, if not, you can leave me hanging. But there was a visual that they were talking about how to blow up this asteroid that was going to destroy Earth. And, you know, do we throw a bunch of nukes at it? And the physicist, the engineer, kind of described it and saying, if you throw a bunch of nuclear bombs at this, you know, it's kind of like if you put a firecracker on your hand and it goes off, it's just going to burn your hand. But if you close your hand and, you know, put that firecracker in, you know, by hand. And that was sort of the same premise, that they were drilling and putting a nuke inside this moving asteroid. And so I kind of think about the DEI efforts that so many companies are doing. And it's kind of like just putting that firecracker on an open hand instead of trying to really address it. I hope that analogy didn't go too far astray and makes sense.
No, I get it. I hear you're saying. I wish I could give you the name of that movie title. And now I'm kind of curious. I have to Google it maybe on the commercial break. But
I'm going to do the same.
yeah, right, there we go. We'll get that when we come back. But I think it's like, you know, like this idea that the sort of the substantive, really addressing an issue versus sort of doing it, you know, to be able to kind of say we did it almost like in name, not really in, you know, in substance, or, you know, form over substance instead of substance over form. I think definitely an issue there. And it kind of like, to me, it's a nice, you know, sort of segue into this question of, you know, what you do a lot, right? We talk about like how many professionals, you know, in the HR and the employee culture realm will focus efforts on improving their individuals' employment conditions, right? You know, and helping them to feel better about their work role. But I'm wondering if you think a more comprehensive approach is necessary to improve employee satisfaction and retention. And then I'll ask you to hold that, though, think about it for the commercial break and come back. So when we come back from the commercial break with Andy Botwin and with myself, Eric Sauver, we're going to talk about like what's another comprehensive approach to employee satisfaction and retention. Hint, and that may have to do with executive coaching. And we'll also get the name of that movie. So don't go anywhere. Just stay tuned to Talk Radio NYC, Employment Law Today, and we'll be right back.
I am Joseph Franklin McElroy, host of the new podcast, Gateway to the Smokies. It airs on talkradio.nyc every Tuesday night from 6 p.m. to 7. Every episode is dedicated to memorable experiences in the Great Smoky Mountains National Park and surrounding areas. This show features experts and locals who will expound upon the richness of culture, history, and adventure that awaits you in the Smokies. Tune in every Tuesday from 6 p.m. to 7 on talkradio.nyc.
Are you passionate about the conversation around racism? Hi, I'm Reverend Dr. TLC, host of the Dismantle Racism Show, which airs every Thursday at 11 a.m. Eastern on talkradio.nyc. Join me and my amazing guests as we discuss ways to uncover, dismantle, and eradicate racism. That's Thursdays at 11 o'clock a.m. on talkradio.nyc.
Are you a small business trying to navigate the COVID-19 related employment laws? Hello, I'm Eric Sauver, employment law, business law attorney, and host of the new radio show, Employment Law Today. On my show, we'll have guests to discuss the common employment law challenges business owners are facing during these trying times. Tune in on Tuesday evenings from 5 p.m. to 6 p.m. Eastern Time on talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
And welcome back to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauver, employment law and business law attorney for business owners, companies, industry agnostic. My guest tonight, Andy Botwin, retired attorney, really just top notch in HR and all things strategy. He is actually the founder of Strategy People and Culture. And Andy, it's great to have you on the show this evening. Really great to have you with us today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me back. And I did get a chance during the break to Google the movie that I couldn't remember. And for any of you that are going to beat me up on it, it is over 20 years old. So I guess I should get a little pass on not remembering the title. It was called Armageddon. So, and it was a pretty good movie. So if anybody's looking for something to watch because they're out of things, maybe that's one that you can watch.
Excellent. Steve, the show, besides providing top-notch analysis and review of cutting-edge employment issues, I think we also can provide some great movies to watch, especially if you're one of those folks that maybe were downsized or you quit your job in the Great Resignation. You can watch the show, you can watch the movie. So excellent evening so far. So I think we left off with a cliffhanger. I had asked you, Andy, about a lot of your colleagues, a lot of folks in the professional HR employee culture realm, and they focus their efforts on improving basically the employees' conditions, helping them feel better about their work role. But I think you take a more comprehensive approach to improving employee satisfaction. And I'm wondering if so, what that approach is. You can share it with us tonight.
Yeah, well, to be clear, I think there's merit on focusing on sort of the employees' environment and their experience. So, anything I might say here, I don't want to discount that because there is value in that. However, how we came up with it, but that sort of one directional thinking that we referenced a little earlier, I think comes into play here because it's, we're going to find a solution. If we have pizza on Fridays, that's going to make people happy. And of course, as long as you like pizza, most people like free pizza. What's not to like? It's lunch, it's free, it's provided, and pizza, right? Yeah. So, those things are great. However, those aren't the deep, meaningful things. They mean something to people, but if you just do them in a vacuum without creating human connection, then you're not creating something sustainable. You use the reference, substance over form or form over substance. And how substantive in terms of is somebody going to be happy with their work environment is giving them pizza. It'll be nice, but that alone won't do the trick. And so I think I don't know that there's a perfect job. I don't know that there's for employees. I don't know that there's a manager that's a perfect leader. And I don't know if there's decisions that are perfect for any organization. But what I do know is that, leaders by definition get people to follow them. And I don't know that enough people focus on their effectiveness of people following them. I'm a manager, I'm in charge, so people should follow me. And yeah, that's actually true. You're given some level of authority that people are hired into to listen to, but to get them to really follow and want to follow, that's a different story.
Right. Right. Very true point, Andy. True. I mean, like to have someone follow you, say, sort of follow your lead, your direction, follow what you ask them to do because they have to out of fear of being fired or reprimanded versus, like, say, follow them with maybe a bit more enthusiasm, sort of like from the heart, we're wanting to follow. I think comes back to how well a leader is trained to be a leader, to recognize their role, to inspire workers, inspire employees. So, I mean, and I agree with you too, that something you said, I want to just point out that I agree. We're not discounting the importance of looking at the employee experience. I defend a lot of companies in court as an employment law attorney, litigation where either they missed the boat on implicit bias, or they didn't focus enough on disgruntled employees' experiences, and didn't maybe fail to see certain discriminatory patterns, and they found themselves, in a lawsuit or a mediation that I'm representing them in. So I definitely hear you on that. And yeah, there's no perfect answers. All that I think is very interesting.
Yeah, and as you're describing, some of the situations that you've had to defend companies on, it's sort of the perfect explanation behind the concept of the different service lines that I do. A lot of people, when they hear discrimination, sexual harassment, training and investigations, and then executive coaching, they're kind of like, what? Where's the connection? And in some ways, they truly are, not connected. But when I talk to people about sexual harassment issues, discrimination issues, my view is there are definitely situations where there are bad actors, bad employers that do bad things that truly are, in a pure sense, discrimination, sexual harassment. And there are employees that misinterpret a lot of situations and, may even be predatory, but and I don't know what percentage both of those are, but I do know that there's a really big middle where people say and do things that they certainly don't intend to be offensive, but they are. And, if you heard them, that off-color joke that most people have been around socially, at work, etc. And that, could be discriminatory. It could be, some form of microaggression, when we talk about the world of DEI and unconscious bias, particularly, but it could be other things. And what I found is there's a lot of situations that if the person was a more effective leader, and in part, it doesn't necessarily mean that they were just liked, but they were respected for the way that they went about their business, what they did, how they tried to lead their people in a function. Those little off-color and off-putting comments or actions, people might have just shrugged their shoulders and looked the other way and said, you know what, I didn't like that, but I really believe in Eric. He's a great leader, and I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt. He probably didn't mean what I heard. Right. Whereas if it's a leader that they don't like, that they don't respect, they're more likely to interpret it the other way and saying, I'm not giving this person the benefit of the doubt at all. That person's a jerk, and they meant to be insulting and offensive. And so then that could be the simple balance between a claim and an action. And where a company's hiring you to defend, that costs money. And you've got a disgruntled employee, and maybe people that they're connected with, and it could lead to turnover and all of those kinds of things. And it's just a losing proposition.
Yeah, Andy, 100% on that. It's like that whole kind of big middle, I think people tend to look at a situation and look at like the outlier or the extremes. And of course, we've got the extreme, like the covert, the overt, obvious, like very, overbearing extreme examples of sexual harassment or discrimination that people shudder to see or think about, that make the headlines. And we also have, of course, situations otherwise where somebody might be maybe an employee who misconstrues something, or is disgruntled and perhaps fabricates a claim. And but there's a wide middle ground. And you're right. I think that if you have good executive leadership, right, so also good executive coaching for those leaders, it could be that difference between people saying this guy or gal right didn't maybe mean this, and maybe even that leader might be open to hearing the employee might feel safe to voice and say, hey, Dave, manager Dave, when you said this, I actually found it kind of offensive, and maybe Dave might be able to apologize for that remark instead of doubling down and they're defensive. And I think that maybe that's where this sort of marriage of your services comes in, that you can be working on good leaders, and it actually could have a very positive effect on reducing implicit bias, reducing discrimination, reducing harassment. Is that a good sort of summary of what you're saying in part?
Yeah, I think all of those different types of issues come down to awareness.
Yes.
They're all workable, they're all improvable, and in some cases, if it's a kind of issue, fixable. It's really about sort of a receptive audience and a willingness to work on that. And so that's really where leadership becomes so crucial in this process. It's not just about making decisions, back to the free pizza ideas, which are important and they're real and they are material. However, if they're not going to look at themselves and say, well, why did we have this problem in the first place?
Right.
Why was our organization, having some kind of, rockiness that led us to saying we need to give free pizza? It's kind of like, fixing the, put a Band-Aid on the symptom instead of addressing the cold.
No, I'm sorry, I was about to say it's like putting a Band-Aid, right, on some kind of, say, some kind of skin irritation that keeps coming up, or just like putting like itch cream on a hive in a rash situation. So, sorry, I used the Band-Aid. I was like, I was just thinking that actually, it's like a quick Band-Aid solution, instead of a more deep dive. When someone else has the same analogy, it always kind of strikes me as interesting. Like, oh, let's just go in there too. But yeah, no, I think that, and I think that's a nice kind of, segue into a nice kind of like lead into this question about like, let's talk a bit about executive business coaching. What is it? What are some of the goals of coaching executives and leaders that you have, let's say, when you coach within a company or organization?
Yeah, so I'd say that's a two-part question in terms of what is it and what are the goals. And so what is it, I guess, is the first part that I would comment on. And I think that means different things to different people. When people hear the coaching, coaching, the coaching world, it's become a huge industry. There's lots of people out there that do it. If you're out in the business community networking, you've probably met people that say, I'm a coach, I'm a business coach, I'm an executive coach. And it really means different things to different people. I would sort of broadly divide the coaching world into two main buckets. One is a group of people that say that our job is to really come in and help work with that leader as a consultant towards them. And what I mean by that is give advice, give viewpoints, share my experiences actively, and give suggestions. It's kind of like, the doctor saying, try, take two and call me in the morning. Let me know how it works out. And that's fine. That has a purpose. The other half is sort of more of a challenge and thought partner, and less giving those solutions, less giving the consulting advice, and more challenging the thought process. Also, that's fine, and that has a place. I tend to focus my world in that latter half. So while I like to think that sometimes I have some good thoughts and my experience can be relevant, and I'll share that. But I believe from a sustainability standpoint of individual growth, whether something's successful or a failure, the learning that an individual will take from whatever it is that they're trying will be exponentially greater and sticky to apply to the future if they sort of come to that decision that whatever it is that they're going to decide on, try to do differently, whatever that case is.
Interesting. Like, yeah, that latter, idea of encouraging them to challenge, right, their thinking, their attitudes, maybe their thought processes, systems of beliefs. I think it's a great, part of that coaching equation, not just sort of advising or counseling, giving good advice of things that might work, such as pizza on Fridays. But seriously, but no, and so I think it's a really important, point, a distinction there. I think a lot of people don't realize that that's what coaching can do. It could, and I think in terms of sustainability, you're right. It sort of reminds me of that expression about sort of, giving a person a fish versus like teaching a person how to fish, right? In terms of, giving the person a fish, they won't be hungry for that meal, and teach them how to fish, and they can, of course, feed themselves for a lifetime. And I know one might argue that you need to maybe first give the person a fish if they're like starving to death, so I have the energy to finish. But it's interesting. Like, yeah, I think I hear that, idea of encouraging leaders to challenge the thought process. And I want to get more into that in our last question, but we're actually on our last commercial break. When we come back, I'll be talking with Andy. We'll talk a little bit more about his firm, Strategy, People, Culture, and their approach to the issues of tonight. And then we'll wrap it up by about 5:57. So I'm just saying, for now, folks, stay tuned to Employment Law Today. I'm your host, Eric Sauber, here tonight with Andy Botwin on Talk Radio NYC. We'll be right back.
Hey everybody, it's Tommy D, the nonprofit sector connector, coming at you from my attic. Each week here on talkradio.nyc, I host a program, Philanthropy in Focus. Nonprofits impact us each and every day, and it's my focus to help them amplify their message and tell their story. Listen each week at 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time until 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time, right here on talkradio.nyc.
In a post-COVID world, you may have many unanswered questions regarding your health. Are you looking to live a healthier lifestyle? Do you have a desire to learn more about mental health and enhance your quality of life? Or do you just want to participate in self-understanding and awareness? I'm Frank R. Harrison, host of Frank About Health, and each Thursday, I will tackle these questions and work to enlighten you. Tune in every Thursday at 5 p.m. on talkradio.nyc, and I will be frank about health to advocate for all of us.
Calling all pet lovers.
Pet Avengers, assemble!
On the Professionals and Animal Lovers show, we believe the bond between animal lovers is incredibly strong. It mirrors that bond between pets and their owners. Through this program, we come together to learn, educate, and advocate.
Join us live every Wednesday at 2 p.m. at talkradio.nyc.
You're listening to Talk Radio NYC at www.talkradio.nyc. Now broadcasting 24 hours a day.
Welcome back, everyone, to Employment Law Today. I hope our audience at home tonight, listening or watching, is really taking all this in, this conversation about, the Great Resignation, and also about ways to counter it. You're looking at leadership, looking at sustainable solutions, and going deep to the roots of issues and problems, and also not just seeking out quick fixes. So you're really getting a lot from you tonight, Andy, and I really appreciate, once again, the fact that you're joining us on the show this evening.
Yeah, my pleasure.
Sure thing. I just wanted to ask you, that last point about, executive coaching, I'd rather want to, bring home what you said, that it's kind of connected to the other work you do. So that takes you to maybe another question for you, or maybe a final question of sorts. How do you and your firm, Strategy, People, Culture, distinguish yourselves from other firms in the, let's say, HR, in the diversity in the coaching fields? What unique philosophies and approach do you use? And that's really it as a question.
Yeah, differentiating is sort of a funny thing. I think most people, when they're buying a service, they're buying it because they have a desire and or need, but they're also buying you. And particularly coaching, what's incredibly important about that is fit. And some people, I want more business like the next person, and I want more clients, and I've got a team of people that would love more clients as well. But it's not just about getting the client, because coaching, particularly because of our approach and our style, and you asked about goals prior to the break, which we didn't get into, but the goals are really very specific to an individual. And so I think what we do particularly well is we thrive ourselves on understanding those goals, and in a customized way, work with individuals to keep an eye on those goals, but allow for adaptation. because, I could talk to you today and your day today could be totally different than tomorrow. And there could be different things that are going to drive your readiness to really challenge your awareness, to open up and be ready to really go deep to try to understand how you could do things differently, how you want to, in some ways, people use the word change, I say evolve, but how you want to push yourself to grow. From a coaching standpoint, I try to describe it sometimes when people ask, what's it like, if you can picture almost like a little visual, like a box in your mind. Inside that box is your thinking, your style, your approach. When we're in natural situations, we tend to have sort of natural thinking. That's what unconscious bias is. It's our brains processing millions of pieces of data into what we know. And I think coaching is so much about maybe changing that box, expanding it, and maybe, instead of it being hard lines on that box, create maybe like a dotted line. So there's a little more breathing room to allow for that to grow. Because there's almost always more than one possibility. And our minds sometimes naturally bring us to one or two possibilities. And, the decision may ultimately be the same in some cases, but if you can think of 3, 4, 5 possibilities more naturally, then you'll be better positioned to make better decisions. Just like we were talking about before about the Great Resignation and why people are leaving. There's the adaptation to the decisions that we make. And that was some of the trials and tribulations I had, early on in the firm I was a partner in. I wasn't part of the executive committee, the key owners in the company, and they would make decisions. And then, I'd learn about it and I'd go talk to the CEO and say, well, did you think about this impact on our people? And talk about it from a different angle. And it would create a whole nother set of conversation. And if those leaders, when they were in that room, were thinking about the business issues that led to that decision, but were also able to think about these other possibilities in terms of the impact, they might have more efficiently made better decisions.
Yeah. So it's like, I guess, the whole kind of expanded viewpoint when you make decisions as an executive or as a leader, a manager or a business owner. It's so important. That's true, because I think that, if we just come at things with our own perspective, what we think the solution is to an issue, we're going to probably miss something. But if we can expand that, I guess, consciousness, that awareness, as you mentioned earlier. So I suppose are those some of the goals? I guess you mentioned that we didn't fully cover some of the goals of coaching executives. It sounds like one goal, it sounds like I'm hearing from you, if I'm correct, Andy, is to get them to expand their view and see things in a broader perspective.
Although I would actually say it a little differently, because that's more of the approach. When somebody's thinking about hiring me, whether it's the CEO of a company, which is probably about 2/3 of my personal clientele, or it's an organization looking to bring me in to work with one of their managers for some reason or another, when I'll ask them, what are the goals? So if you think about it and you step back, what do you want to be different 6 months from now? And, because that's typically what a coaching arrangement in my world begins at, is a 6-month type of arrangement. But, in those 6 months as a CEO, how would you measure success? If it looks like a duck, acts like a duck, and talks like a duck kind of thing, what would quack for you? I just came up with that. If that landed with you, let me know. And
I love your metaphors and analogies, and I do.
And if it's not the ultimate decision maker and it's somebody in the organization, I would typically have that conversation jointly with them and whoever their supervisor is, and say, organizationally, what are your goals? And then individually, there might be some other goals that we might also work on. And my job or one of the people on my team's jobs responsibilities would be to keep an eye on those goals, so we don't lose sight of them, even if we deviate from time to time because of something else that's happening in the business or with them.
Got it. Really interesting. response there, Andy. A lot, to unpack there just for our viewers to listen tonight. I think, has some really great conversation here. We're actually coming close to the end of our hour. I want to give you a little bit of chance, now, just a couple of minutes to share, like, briefly, your contact information. How can we find you? Website, floor is yours.
Sure. So my website is www.strategypeopleculture.com. Again, sort of a strange name, but it's three words as you might phonetically spell it. Strategypeopleculture.com. Phone number is 833-ROCK-SPC. So you might have to translate that, but an easy way to remember it, 833-ROCK-SPC. My direct email is Andy, ANDY, @strategypeopleculture.com. Would certainly welcome the opportunity to chat with any one of you. I have a second company that is a technology-driven solution for online harassment and discrimination training. But if you reach me through the contact information I gave you, and that is your interest, I can certainly talk to you about that and get you connected to the right people as well.
Excellent, Andy. That's really great to have your number, your website, your other company, all that information. That's great to have. It was a pleasure having you on the show this evening. Great to talk about this very important issue and the marriage of executive business coaching with HR and employee culture and all those different topics. So I want to thank you once again for being on the show with us. Folks, you can reach Andy Botwin at the info he gave. I'm Eric Sarver. I'm your host of Employment Law Today. You can tune in every Tuesday night at 5 p.m. right here on talkradio.nyc. If you enjoy what you heard, tell your friends, tell your colleagues to tune in. Feel free to share the live link when it's out there on facebook.com to Talk Radio NYC. I wish everyone a great night, great week. Stay healthy, stay safe. We'll be back next Tuesday with more interesting topics. So thank you again, Andy, and have a great evening.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.